Welcome back to Proxhammer, everybody, and today we're going to be reviewing Eldar Fire Dragons. So, Eldar Fire Dragons are one of those kind of cool units that, in my mind, were always super awesome. And they were one of the few units in the entire 40k universe that could all carry basically melta guns. So, the question is now, though, are they still worth taking in the current meta? Because, to be honest with everybody, the thing about Fire Dragons is that they're a little bit more expensive than they used to be, and also there's a lot more competition. Other units can step up to the plate much easier now. Harlequin Void Reavers are something that I've seen quite a few times in tournaments because of their ability to kill vehicles very easily and from a safe distance, as well as some of the upgrades to heavy weapons in our army. So let's take a quick overview of Fire Dragons. They are the only aspect warriors with toughness 4, which I find a little interesting and kind of weird. They have a 3+ armor save, strength 9, AP -4, damage D6 +2 weapons, which is very phenomenal against dealing with multi-wounded things. They can reroll wound results of 1 when shooting vehicles or monsters, and they're 23 points per model. And as for the Exarch, most Exarchs in the Eldar codex bring something to the table as far as Exarch powers, or, they give the unit something extra to kind of make their abilities even better, or maybe perhaps allow them to perform a certain role in your list. But what does the Fire Dragon Exarch exactly bring to the table besides slightly more damage? Well, let's go ahead and take a quick look at his Exarch powers. So the first one is Blazing Fury. Basically gives the unit 4 inches on their weapon. So instead of range 12, they're going to be range 16. If you choose to take a Fire Pike, that will be range 22. Burning Heat, when within 9, the unit can auto wound its target. So this is pretty good, except for the fact that against most targets, you're going to be wounding on 3s. If not 2s. So a vast majority of the time, the ability is just not going to be used that much. And it requires you to be a little bit closer. Having said that, it's not a bad ability. In certain scenarios, it's actually pretty good for dealing with really tough targets like super heavies and stuff like that. But in most basic scenarios, it's just not going to do that much. And then lastly, you have Dragon's Bite. And Dragon's Bite is probably the worst power out of the group. It's also the cheapest. The reason why I say it's the worst is because you have to be within 6 inches. You have to target a monster or vehicle unit. Okay, so most of the time it's going to be within 6 inches, but it's actually half range. And it has to target a vehicle or a monster on top of that. And so when you're targeting this, only the Exarch is affected, for one. It doesn't affect the entire unit. If the attack is made with a Dragon's Fusion Gun or Fire Pike, you add 2 to the damage characteristic, not the greatest. And if that attack is made with a Dragon's Breath Flamer, you add 1 to the damage, and then you can reroll the wound roll. That's a terrible ability because the Dragon's Breath Flamer is never going to be used on this unit. So, I know that a lot of people like the Dragon's Breath Flamer as a kind of a fun weapon. But to be more than honest with you guys, it has no place in a Fire Dragon unit. Fire Dragons are an anti-tank unit, and the Dragon's Breath Flamer is good at killing, like, Space Marines. So, not quite the best weapon. But, unfortunately, the Exarch doesn't really bring much to the table here. And the reason why isn't because Blazing Fury or Burning Heat are necessarily bad Exarch powers. It's more that they just cost a lot of points, and they don't really bring a lot of value over just having an additional Fire Dragon to the unit. So, Blazing Fury gives 4 inches. That's pretty decent in some scenarios, but it's not going to prevent the unit from getting shot up a lot. It's just going to help the unit create a little more distance between themselves and the enemy once they destroy their target. So again, it could be useful as a utility piece, trying to get some distance away from your enemy, but it's expensive. Burning Heat is another power, but it requires you to get within 9 inches, so even closer. So yes, you're going to auto-wound your target, but the trade-off isn't that great, and unless you're going against something like a super heavy and you have a max unit, you're not really going to get a whole lot out of it, unfortunately. Point for point, Burning Heat is only going to be really effective against targets that you need 4s to wound against, because Fire Dragons already get a reroll on 1s to wound against monsters and vehicles. And there's also plenty of stratagems and abilities that improve your wound chances when getting out of a transport and things like that, like mobile fighters. So it's not really useful overall in a lot of setups. And of course, like I previously mentioned, Dragon's Bite, it requires you to be extremely close. It requires you to be targeting a vehicle or monster. And at the end of the day, what does it do but give you just +2 to your damage? And if you have a Dragon's Breath Flamer, it's only +1. So there's not a lot of use for it, to be honest with you. It's only useful with the Dragon's Breath Flamer, and that's if you want to create a meme squad just to use the Dragon's Breath Flamer. So, I mean, you know, it's just not very good. It's not a very good ability, and to be honest with you, it's probably one of the worst in the book. But it is cheap, so if you want to use it just to get the extra ballistic skill and wound, I understand, but it's not the best. It's certainly not the best power. So, yeah, the Exarch really doesn't add much to the unit that a normal Fire Dragon and additional Fire Dragon would do. So, what is the best way to field Fire Dragons in this edition? And I think it's still the same as it's always been. They're most cost-effective in small squads, 5 or 6, because to be honest with you, anything more is pretty much overkill for a vast majority of the vehicles and monsters you're going to target. And that's really saying a lot. They're very powerful models individually because of their weapon, so you don't want to run too many. Because remember, this unit is going to become very expensive very quickly because of the fact that the models are more powerful. So you don't want overkill. And you want to be able to kill multiple tanks in one turn. You want to be in separate places if need be to do that, so that your models can trade up points-wise. And if you're running a squad of 10 with all the fixings and stuff, you're just never going to be able to do that effectively without retaliation. Because, to be honest with you, Fire Dragons are very sought after. If your opponent doesn't have a good way of dealing with Fire Dragons after they shoot their initial shots, then they're just going to run all over enemy vehicles, enemy monsters, and even characters aren't safe. So, if you run a squad of 10, you run the risk of, killing whatever you're going to kill, overkilling it, and then dying to enemy shooting without making up that unit's points worth. And as far as giving the Exarch an Exarch power, it's not really needed, to be honest, because basically for the same cost in most cases, and to the best Exarch powers cases, it almost costs the same amount as a Fire Dragon. So you can just get an additional Fire Dragon, gives the squad a little bit more toughness, gives you a little more value with damage, which is actually technically more value than any of the other ones could give you. And to be completely honest, with the right support and setup, the armies that Fire Dragons are going to be effective with in the Craftworld Eldar don't really need a lot of support when it comes to, failing to hit or wound. There's a lot of abilities that are going to allow you to reroll hits and wounds on targets that you really need to kill if you're strategic about it. So there's really no reason, in my opinion, to have the Exarch powers. I think it just makes them more expensive without giving much value. And of course, there's going to be exceptions to this, right? So, like, for example, if you think enemies are going to take super heavies against you and you want a tool to deal with super heavy tanks, well, Fire Dragons with the, I think Burning Heat, Fire Dragons with Burning Heat are going to absolutely be great, because guess what? Most Titans and stuff like that and mega hard to kill things have toughness 9. That's going to actually help you. in those cases. But unless something is toughness 9, to be honest with everybody, the burning heat, the one that auto wounds, is just not going to help you in a lot of scenarios. Now, the extra 4 range could be useful, for sure. Could be very useful for keeping your fire dragons out of assault, charge distances and stuff like that. Maybe against more assault-oriented enemies. But again, just don't think it's worth its cost in general. Because once fire dragons unload and do their job, they're basically a sacrificial unit at that point. You can assume they're going to be killed. That's just a fact. The extra toughness they got is not really going to help them as far as that goes. Now, what are some of the downsides of fire dragons? So, fire dragons do require transport. Absolutely. They cannot walk to the battlefield. It's too easy for an opponent to keep out of range of them, and they're just not going to be effective. Too easy to be shot at and stuff. So they do need some sort of transport. Personally, with the new Falcon special rules, I believe that the Falcon is the perfect transport for them because of Cloud Strike and Sudden Assault. This gives fire dragons the ability to get within range of a vehicle, enemy vehicle, very easily, and be able to take it down extremely easily as well. Now, their short range puts them in a lot of danger from assaults, from other shooting. So they really have no great way of getting out of it after they unload. But this is a problem they've always had, and like I've said, I've had many games as an Eldar player throughout the editions. I guarantee you, I've pretty much never had a unit of fire dragons, unless I was just absolutely dominating the battle. I've never had fire dragons survive in a close game, ever. And the reason that is because, well, they're such a high priority target. They're just never going to really survive after they do their job. But if you can get them to do their job, they will trade up and you'll be successful. And I think really the real question about fire dragons now is, are they still worth taking? Because they used to be absolutely the premier anti-tank unit of the Eldar codex. No doubt about it. Usually players would take some form of anti-tank, whether it be fire dragons or something else. But to be honest with you, the new Harlequin Void Reavers are absolutely fantastic at taking out vehicles. So are fire dragons still on the table when considering the fact that you have Void Reavers that can be easily taken as a patrol and can deal with vehicles so easily from a very safe range? And here's the thing. If we compare them, you can take about 3 Void Reavers for the same price as 5 Fire Dragons in a Falcon. So you can take a squad of Void Reavers. Now, the Void Reavers are going to do 6 D3 shots at minus 3 AP and damage 3. Damage 3. So that's just a solid 3. It's not a D3. I know it kind of looks like that on the screen right there, but it's damage 3. And they always wound on 4+ versus vehicles, and on 6s they deal D3 additional mortal wounds. So that's nasty. That's pretty good, and that's essentially a little bit better against a lot of vehicle targets. And Void Reavers have the benefit of, they're not a one-shot wonder. They're not going to go in and kill whatever. I mean, they'll kill or maim severely any tank, but they're not going to go in like fire dragons, kill something, and then die themselves. They're going to continue to rack up value throughout the battle if you're careful with them, especially with some of the stratagems that are available to Eldar. So what do fire dragons do better? Well, fire dragons have better AP. On average, they have more damage per shot. They wound a little bit easier, and they have access to Sudden Assault, which Void Reavers can have too, but Void Reavers don't really need it. So it's arguable that Void Reavers don't even care about that because it's not needed. Their range is so decent and their speed is so decent, they can hit whatever targets they need to pretty much every turn. But I still think fire dragons are worth taking in some scenarios. Because fire dragons don't really, let me put it this way. Void Reavers cannot deal with monsters. Fire dragons can. Void Reavers are exceptionally bad against monsters if you choose the Haywire abilities. Now, you could go with the prismatic cannons. That's true, especially if you think you're going to be facing a lot of Tyrannid or something like that. But to be quite honest with everybody, I think the fire dragons beat out the prismatic cannons in a lot of ways. because at that point, they're just a little bit more cost effective when you take them with the Falcon. Because remember, the Falcon has a pulse laser, has the ability to upgrade its other weapon to something anti-tankish for still around the same points Void Reavers are. So Fire Dragons, I think, are a little better against monsters than Void Reavers can be. I'd have to double check on the math, but I'm pretty sure they have better monster killing power in general. So to wrap this up, in conclusion, I think Fire Dragons are still pretty much the best tank killing unit for the Craftworld Eldar. But to be honest with you, they're not really an auto-include anymore because of all the new Harlequin stuff. So Harlequins are also now very good at killing vehicles through their Void Reavers and Haywire Cannons and stuff like that. Now, they can compete because, to be honest with you, in this meta where mobility is just king, Fire Dragons aren't as good in a lot of scenarios. I mean, think about it also. Void Reavers can zip around the battlefield and capture objectives too. And that's a big part of this edition. So I can see why a lot of competitive players are steering away from Fire Dragons a lot and going with the Void Reavers instead. It makes sense from a tactical perspective, but I still think Fire Dragons are a great Alpha Strike unit for killing heavy tanks and also, in addition, big monsters. Fire Dragons aren't as good in a lot of scenarios. I mean, think about it also. Void Reavers can zip around the battlefield and capture objectives too. And that's a big part of this edition. So I can see why a lot of competitive players are steering away from Fire Dragons a lot and going with the Void Reavers instead. It makes sense from a tactical perspective, but I still think Fire Dragons are a great Alpha Strike unit for killing heavy tanks and also, in addition, big monsters. Because like I stated before, Void Reavers don't really get any bonuses versus monsters, only vehicles if you're taking the Haywire ability. So, in conclusion, I think Fire Dragons are still a great unit. I think they have a place in a lot of lists. I just don't think they're an auto-include for every list because of the reasons I mentioned, and people might be more willing to take Void Reavers because of their ability to kind of capture objectives as well as deal heavy damage to tanks. Alrighty, that's it for today, everybody. I will see you guys in the next video. Hope you guys learned something. Still love Fire Dragons, and I will see you guys next time.